Dear Reverend Fathers, brothers, sisters, and OCDS members, good evening to you all. As you already know, 2023 to 25 has been declared by the last general chapter as the Theresian cycle. As this year we celebrate the 150th year of the birth, and 2025 is the centenary of the sainthood of Saint Therese of Child Jesus. To make these celebrations spiritually enriching, the provincial administration has envisaged a series of programs. Hence, today we have a lecture on the historical background of the times of Saint Therese. This lecture will be delivered by Reverend Dr. Father John Francis Sequeira. I'm very sure that he doesn't require an introduction, as most of you know him personally. Still, as Jesus asked John the Baptist to baptize him, I'm given this privilege, and I venture with joy to introduce Reverend Dr. John Francis Sequeira. Reverend Dr. John Francis Sequeira is a discalced Carmelite priest from the province of Karnataka, Goa province. He hails from Most Holy Saviour Church, Agra, Mangalore diocese. He made his first profession on 14th December 1984 at Margao, Goa. He did his philosophical studies at Pushpashrama Philosophical Institute, Mysore, and his theological studies at St. Joseph's Seminary, Mangalore. He was ordained on 29th of April 1992. Dr. John completed his Masters in Philosophy at the University of Mysore, and again Masters in Philosophy from the University of Vienna, Austria, and German Linguistics from the University of Vienna, Austria. He has a doctorate in philosophy from the Pontifical University Angelicum, Rome. He specialized in hermeneutics, that is, interpreting the classical texts. He is a visiting professor to many institutes of higher learning in India and abroad. Apart from his intense philosophical lectures, he is also a specialist in human resource development programs. As a student of mysticism, Father John is known for his meditations on inner silence and divine intimacy, and to this effect, instrumental in initiating two contemplative centers, namely Rishivana, a center for inner silence and contemplation at Mangalore in Karnataka, and Divine Springs at Shelly, Goa. He was the founder and chief editor of Dhyana, a journal for religion and spirituality, and founder editor of Jiva Jala, a Kannada journal. Besides being a regular writer to many well-known journals of philosophy and spirituality, he has authored books such as Discipline of Dialogue, Transforming Formation, Combating Terrorism, and many more. He is in high demand for his classes, talks, retreats, workshops, both in India and abroad. On behalf of the Provincial of Karnataka, Goa, Reverend Father Sylvester D'Souza, and Council in charge of Spirituality, Reverend Dr. Father Alphonse Brito, and all of you dear brothers and sisters, I invite Reverend Dr. John F. Sequeira to deliver a talk on Saint Therese of the Child Jesus. Over to you, Reverend Dr. John Sequeira.
Dear friends, we are on a series of talks on Saint Therese of Child Jesus, who is popularly called Little Flower. This is the first and the preparatory talk on the background to the spirituality of little Therese. We have to keep in mind three things that are most important to understand the life and spirituality of little Therese. Number one, the historical background in and around which Saint Therese lived, maybe even before her birth and after. Secondly, her family background. And third, her own personality and upbringing. Let us deal with each one of these little by little. The first one, the historical background in and around little Therese. That of the entire Europe, specifically France during the time of little Therese, are most important to mention. Europe was shivering under the effects of French Revolution and its aftermath. French Revolution began somewhere in 1789 and almost had ended by 1873 when little Therese was born. For Saint Therese, it was anything but a distant memory. However, there were a lot of ripple effects of the French Revolution that affected the times of little flower and unleashed political, religious, and social concerns that persisted as hot issues during the time of little Therese. Positively, French Revolution was a great blessing. The ideals of liberty, equality, fraternity were good and noble. The purging effects of the revolution had brought into force the quality of the clergy, a dedicated battalion of lay people to the service of others. There was a renewed sense of mission to rebuild that was lost, a renewal of community life as a foundation for the works of mercy. These were all positive things, but a lot of negative things also had to be seen. For example, French Revolution, in one word, was a reign of terror. There was a wave of ferocious anti-clericalism as a result. Many legislations had nullified the privileged position and institutions of the French church. As a result, not just the prince bishop's complacency was affected, but schools, religious orders, and a multitude of charitable organizations as well. Therefore, in 1815, when the monarchy was restored in France, the Catholics had more than desired only one thing, that is to establish the link between the altar and the crown, the church and the monarch that existed before the revolution. However, the worst effects of French Revolution were a sense of polarization that happens in any revolution. Even the best minds among the reformers were unable to see the beauty and goodness available within the church. For many, the church was still an antiquated symbol of superstition and misrule. It had to be totally destroyed if liberty were to be revived and modernity restored. Therefore, we see anti-clericalism and anti-religiosity continuing to persist till the end of the 19th century among the Frenchmen. As a result, most of the devout Catholics had to come to associate the revolution with terror and republic with injustice. For them, freedom of the church would be equal to protection of a monarch. Even a bad king was better than none. That is all about French Revolution and how it has affected little Therese. Let's go to the family background of little Therese. Louis and Zélie, the parents of Therese, belong to the pious family background. What happened of this polarization in the society happened also to Catholic faith orientation. And therefore, within the ordinary Catholic families, a certain amount of adherence, affiliation, and too much attachment to Catholicism, maybe even conservatism, a certain amount of unwarranted piety and scrupulosity enters in. And therefore now, Catholicism or religiosity is lived with tremendous rigorism. And that is what we find in Louis Martin, the father of little Therese, who was a very venerable and pious man, was a dreamer according to the description given to us by Therese. As a son of Pierre Martin, a captain of the French army, Louis was raised as a man of order, discipline, and courage, and who would jump in to take decisions both for himself and his family. He was a meditative and deeply religious who carried within himself the dream of a monastic life. Although he was never rejected of becoming a monk, but he was sent back to his higher studies when he entered the monastic life, and therefore he would live for the rest of his life as though he were a monk. Zélie, on the other hand, came from a very, very different family background. Her parents were both marked by strongly opposite types. They were rough, authoritative, hard to please. There was more kindness in the husband than in the wife. They were demanding on their children's moral integrity and religious fidelity. Therefore, Zélie had suffered a lot from this demanding will of the parents. We see this in her own personality of being austere, constrained, and scrupulous. This led her even the option of joining the religious congregation. However, we see all this is changing in Zélie. Once she was married to Louis, a man of great warmth and affection. The beauty of their fruitful love and the joy of the children bloomed Zélie to be a totally different person, together with her 5 surviving children and a husband, Louis. In summary, Louis and Zélie belonged to a conservative Catholic family background. Home was a little religious house, little convent, with routine prayers, sacraments, family pilgrimages. Piety was in excess, no doubt, but was coupled with a lot of spiritual love and affection. In other words, a small convent type of lifestyle. They had 5 children surviving out of the total 9. Marie, Pauline, Leonie, Céline, and Therese, the little one. Only the first 3 she could breastfeed herself, and therefore who lived to be 80, 90, and 78 years old respectively. And the other 2 we see die quite young. Once we know the family background of Little Flower, let us go to her own life and see how was Little Flower in her own lifestyle. Little Flower's personality. She was born on 2nd January 1873 when Louis was 50 years old and Zélie in her 42nd. She was expecting a boy, in fact. Zélie had prayed that this would be a good boy, a good priest, and a good missionary too. Although Zélie had decided never to give her this child in the hands of a wet nurse because of the previous experience she had with Celine, she had to change her mind because of the strict orders from her doctor. Thus, Therese was entrusted to the care of a wet nurse who lived in the countryside, and Therese had to live there the first year of her life. The first shock of little flower was experienced when she was just about 4.5 years, when she loses her mother on 28 August 1877. Therese herself noted later that a deep wound that left in her because of the death of her dear mother. She was unable to recover from this shock practically for the next 10 long years. Pauline, her favorite sister, becomes her second mother now, and this was the first turning point of her life. Now, in these 4.5 years, together with Zélie to be around, little flower grows as a bubbly girl with a lot of courage, with lot of joy, and with lot of a strong personality. However, all that goes away once her mother is gone. With the death of their mother, the family now moves to Lisieux from Alençon, where Isidore, the brother of Zélie, arranges a nice house for the Martin family. Little Therese would live here for the next 11 years. However, after the death of her mother, Therese, who was once full of life and zest, becomes timid, retiring, and exceedingly sensitive, who could not bear the company of any strangers, and a small thing would just bring into her tears and timidity. It was here Marie and Pauline took care of their younger sister in their hands and taught them both intellectually and in the spirit. However, Papa was her treasure in life. October 3, 1881. She spends 5 years in school at the Benedictine Abbey in the district of Saint-Denis. Now, a second shock comes when Pauline joined Carmel in 1882, when Therese was just 9 years old. This brings along with it not just occasional outbursts, but also constant headaches, body aches, etc. Although Marie now becomes her third mother, her fights with Celine, the young one, became excessive. All these only reached the end point when she would almost die in a sickness that affected her badly. However, little Therese would narrate later that Mother Mary appeared to her and cured her completely. Then comes her the third shock, when she was just 14 years, when even her third mother, Marie, joins Carmel, and suddenly Leonie, who was always there at home, decides to join the poor Claire, although for a very short period. Leonie primarily for few days joined the poor Claire. Then afterwards we see her joining the Visitation Convent and successively coming out and in of the Visitation Convent, and only later joins and spends around 45 years in Visitation Convent. And it would be always said that little Therese from Carmel was interceding for her perseverance of vocation. Now, having seen the family background, having seen her own personality background, and the political, socio-political situations in France, now let us enter into the life itself of Little Flower. And I would discuss the whole spiritual growth of Little Flower in 3 stages again. First, her childhood days, from birth till she entered Carmel. Second, the early years in Carmel. And third, the final ascent unto conjugal love with Jesus, her bridegroom. The first stage of Little Flower can be called the stage of childhood. At this moment, a bubbly girl. A girl wants to enjoy everything around. As I told you, she was brought up in a pietistic attitude. And therefore, the childhood days were filled with a lot of education in morality, what should be done, should not be done, a lot of prayerfulness, coupled with piety, pilgrimages with the family, and a lot of family celebrations and festal celebrations of the village, as any of the ordinary girl of that age would go through. Because of her devout parents and siblings, little Therese was brought up in deep spiritual pietism. Marie and Pauline, her elder sisters, took extra care to teach her the daily prayers and how to live a Christian, virtuous, and moral life. At the age of 14, she comes across first time a beautiful book. The book titled The End of the Present World and the Mysteries of the Future Life, written by Canon Armignon. By reading this book, Saint Therese gets into a special what is called awareness of the heavenly happiness that was involved in spiritual life. And here onwards, we find her whole thoughts move in a different direction. Her thoughts were now how I can enter Carmel and how I can be joining that heavenly happiness by being alone with Jesus and within the 4 walls of the cloister. She even expressed her desire to join Carmel with the Father. And her father, in turn, symbolically gives a wild flower which she kept till the end of her life. But she was too small. She was just 14. And people or the children couldn't join Carmel at their young age unless they had a special permission from the Holy See. And therefore, they envisage a pilgrimage to Rome to get permission from the Holy Father, Pope Leo XIII. And just to shorten the entire story, when she knelt down before the Pope and to ask his blessing, all that the Pope tells her, you will enter Carmel if God wills. And that made all the rest possible, and we see her joining at the young age of 15. The second aspect of her spiritual life. Little Therese entered Carmel of Lisieux on Monday, 9th April 1888. It was the transferred feast of the Annunciation that year. Leaving behind that beautiful cradle of my childhood, which I was never to see again, is what Little Flower writes later on, as she puts herself in the embrace of life, embrace of solitude and prayer, to be within the 4 walls of Carmel, to be embraced by that boundless love, God Himself, who would break upon her like a wave of love for the rest of her life. Therese was finally at peace because she was searching this peace and this heavenly abode all through her life. She expresses this joy in a letter to the Father. Here I am at last, pulled from under the cart. What a deep joy. I am here forever and ever. Here in Carmel, in the beginning of her years, the books such as The Imitation of Christ and the Gospels were her companions. It is in and through the help of these books Therese develops her first theme of spirituality, which we popularly called the centrality of the fatherhood of God. Through the Gospels, she develops the admiration for the beauty of Jesus. For her, at this stage, Christ becomes the mirror of the Father. How much Jesus desires to love us, she exclaims. She makes the life of Jesus her own. Especially the suffering Jesus becomes her way of life. She commits to the sufferings of Jesus that she would accompany him in his suffering. In other words, the life of Jesus, Saint Therese makes her own life. And especially the second part of the life of Jesus, that is the Jerusalem part, the suffering part, becomes the accompanying story of Therese for the rest of her life. Here at this stage, her motto was to be a martyr of love. Let us go to the third stage and the most beautiful stage of her life. In this third stage of Theresa's life, we find her advanced spirituality. Her advanced spirituality or spiritual motivations even for each one of us. She qualifies this stage as her state of being at God's disposal, as like that of a victim of Holocaust. Whatever I do, I am at the God's disposal. The spirit of divine love consumes her incessantly until she was transformed into that fire herself. The spirit of love sets me aflame with this fire, she writes. At this stage of life, we find her reading the writings of John of the Cross, especially his living flame of love and spiritual canticles, were her preferred stanzas, like stanzas 25 to 29. She takes practically St. John of the Cross as her spiritual guide. We'll see that. And there is a tremendous bonding between St. John of the Cross and little Therese that is happening. At this moment, I want to comment. We don't know whether little Therese read the entire collected works of St. Therese of Avila. We don't know. There is nowhere mentioned of it. However, being a Theresian, being a Carmelite, being inside the four walls of Carmel, we presume that she knew at least a few writings of Saint Teresa of Avila. But what is most important for us at this moment, with which I want to wind up this preliminary talk, is the discovery of little way of Saint Therese. Just 3 months before her death, in the manuscript C, we find her narration about this little way. She calls this little way as a way that is very straight, very short, and totally new. 2 biblical passages struck her very strongly at this stage, which pave way for her little way. Remember, Celine had joined Carmel on 14th, 1894. She brings the copied versions of the Old Testament. Remember those days, normal people were not allowed to read the Old Testament. And therefore, Celine her sister, had copied a few passages of the Old Testament. And she brings this copied version to Carmel, on which now Therese has a hold. And here two passages attracts her so much and upon which she builds her little way. The first one, Proverbs chapter 9, verse 4, which says, "Whoever is a little one, let him come to me." And the second passage is Isaiah 66, 12 and 13. "As whom a mother caresses, so I will comfort you. You will be carried on the breast. Upon the knees, I shall caress you." After reading these two passages, Therese writes, "Never did verse more tender and more melodious came to give joy to my soul." We find this expression on the manuscript C3. After having listened to these words and read them and meditated upon them, she says, there is nothing to do but to be silent and weep with gratitude and love. With all these deep meditations, deep contemplative reflections or contemplative experiences, Saint Therese finally has her little way. And she defines this little way in this verse. This little way which leads to the summit of love and sanctity, this elevator I was searching for is you, my Jesus. Now, it is very interesting here. Saint Therese begins her life as a child in the hands of a God, the Father. And therefore, we have always heard she telling us, God is my Father and I am her little doll. But as the days pass within the walls of Carmel, because of a constant growth of her spiritual life and the deep intimacy that she builds with Jesus, her spouse, now something much more happens, much more profound things happen. She comes to identify herself with her conjugal love, Jesus, her God. And therefore now, she becomes one with Jesus. And Jesus becomes now not just her God, but she even goes to the extent of calling Jesus as her mother. Remember, Saint Teresa had three shocks of her life: death of her mother, the entry of Pauline into Carmel when she was just 9, entry of Mary entering into Carmel when she was 13, whereby she had 3 psychological deep effects into her love. Remember, even she had no breastfeeding from her mother because her mother was suffering from a tumor of the breast, which today we know is cancer. And after 13 long years of fighting with that tumor, Zélie dies of the breast cancer in our language of today. But those days, there was never a thought of that. Now, this deprivation, both psychological and physical, in the life of little flower, brought into its own problems, brought into her own psychological side effects and pathologies. But what I want to conclude in this talk is this. Instead of suffering under the burdens of these pathologies, little flower transforms this pathology into a blessing. Healed from these pathologies by her God who loves her unconditionally. And finally, even elevates herself to the realm of the divine, taking God as her papa, because she loved her earthly papa so much. Now going a step further and beyond, Now she makes Jesus her own mother in the bonding which she was deprived here on earth, now to be fulfilled there in heaven. What a beautiful spirituality. What a beautiful spiritual sublimation. What a beautiful personality to emulate for you and for me. We'll go into the details of this spirituality in the talks to follow. But till that time, God bless you all.
Dear brothers and sisters, on behalf of the Provincial and Reverend Dr. Alphonse Brito, the Council in charge of Spirituality, who arranged this talk, I thank Reverend Dr. John Sequeira for his lucid presentation on Saint Therese of the Child Jesus. Certainly, his insights will help us to have a deeper understanding of the life and teaching of our little sister Therese. May she intercede for all of us. Thank you. Have a pleasant evening. God bless you all.